Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Tax and Financial Matters, the place where we discuss tax and financial matters. Welcome to today's lecture on the principle of direct effect in the European Union. I'm delighted to guide you through this fundamental concept of EU law. Today we'll explore what direct effect is, how it emerged, what conditions must be met, and its implications for both member states and individuals. My ambition is that by the end of this session, you'll have a deeper understanding of how EU law can be directly invoked before national courts, empowering individuals to enforce their rights. The principle of direct effect is a cornerstone of EU legal integration. It gives flesh and blood to the promises of the EU treaties, allowing individuals, not just the EU institutions or member states, to rely on EU law directly in their domestic courts. The concept was famously articulated by the Court of Justice in the landmark case Van Gent and Loos in 1963, where the court recognized that the European Community constitutes a new legal order of international law for the benefit of which states have limited their sovereign rights. Before Van Gent and Loos, international treaties were generally considered to create obligations only between states and not really enforceable by individual citizens. The Court of Justice ruling fundamentally shifted this landscape by emphasizing that the EU law is a new legal order that directly affects individuals. It enabled private parties to challenge national measures conflicting with EU law. This decision greatly contributed to the primacy and uniform application of EU law. The rationale for direct effect lies in ensuring the full effectiveness, what the court often calls as effet utile, of EU law. Without direct effect, EU norms might remain abstract promises. By empowering individuals to invoke these norms, the European legal system ensures that rights granted by the EU law do not merely exist on paper, but are also actionable. This mechanism promotes uniformity, compliance, and a robust legal order that transcends national boundaries. Not all EU provisions automatically have direct effect. Treaties and regulations are often the clear sources of directly effective provisions, as regulations are intended to be directly applicable in all member states. Treaty Articles 2 can be directly effective if they meet certain criteria. Directives, on the other hand, are intended to be implemented by member states and usually require a transformation into national law. Under certain conditions, however, even unimplemented directives can have what we call vertical direct effect. Lastly, decisions addressed to individuals or member states may also create direct effect in appropriate circumstances. The court in Van Gent and Loos set out criteria that have guided the direct effect analysis. For a provision to have direct effect, it must be sufficiently clear and precise, leaving no room for discretion in implementation. It must also be unconditional, meaning its application cannot hinge on subsequent legislative measures. If these criteria are fulfilled, individuals can rely on the provision in the national courts. We distinguish between two modes of direct effect: vertical direct effect, which involves an individual's right to hold the state accountable for failing to comply with EU law, and horizontal direct effect, which refers to situations in which one private party invokes an EU provision to challenge another private party. Certain EU provisions, like regulations and treaty articles, may have both vertical and horizontal direct effect, but directives generally do not have horizontal direct effect. Treaty articles can often be invoked in national courts to ensure that the protection of fundamental freedoms, such as the free movement of goods, workers, and services. Article 45 in the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, which protects the free movement of workers, is a prime example of a provision that can be relied upon both vertically and horizontally. Thus, if a private employer discriminates against a worker based on nationality, the worker may rely on Article 45 in a national court to seek remedy. Regulations are crucial instruments in the EU's legislative arsenal. They apply uniformly across the EU and do not require national implementing measures. Because they are directly applicable, they naturally lend themselves to a direct effect. This means that individuals can rely on regulations against both the state and other individuals. For example, Regulations 492/2011 on the free movement of workers confers enforceable rights on individuals in all member states. Directives, on the other hand, are trickier. There are instructions to member states to achieve certain results by a specified deadline. If a member state fails to implement a directive properly or on time, individuals can rely on its provisions against the state. This is vertical direct effect. However, directives generally do not confer rights that can be enforced horizontally between private parties. The court's decision in Marshall confirmed this. That said, other legal doctrines like indirect effect and state liability can offer individuals relief when directives aren't correctly transposed. For a directive to have vertical direct effect, the implementation deadline must have expired, ensuring that the state's obligation to introduce national measures has matured. The directive's provisions must be self-sufficient and enforceable as they stand. Additionally, the action should be against the state or a body so closely linked to the state that they can be considered its emanation. The Foster versus British Gas case provides guidelines on identifying such state-controlled entities. The court has consistently held that directives were not intended to impose obligations directly on private parties. Allowing horizontal direct effect will bypass national legislators and disrupt the intended legislative process. Instead, the court encourages reliance on interpretive techniques as indirect effect and state liability actions, ensuring that private parties can still vindicate their rights without overstepping the careful balance between EU and national legislators. Indirect effect requires national courts to interpret and apply domestic laws in a manner consistent with the purpose and wording of EU directives. Even if a directive cannot be directly invoked against another individual, it can shape the interpretation of national law to achieve the directive's objectives. This ensures EU law's effectiveness without disturbing the established prohibition on horizontal direct effect for directives. State liability allows individuals to claim damages against a member state that breaches EU law. If non-implementation or incorrect implementation of a directive causes harm, the injured party can seek monetary compensation. This remedy, affirmed in Frankovic and further developed in Factortame, ensures that even when direct enforcement of a directive is not possible, individuals are not left without recourse. EU law is a dynamic legal order, and the Court of Justice continues to shape and refine the principle of direct effect. The EU Charter on Fundamental Rights, for instance, now plays a role in direct effect discussions. As the EU evolves, so does the scope of rights and obligations enforceable directly before national courts. Debates persist on whether the boundaries on horizontal direct effect should be revisited, especially in the light of evolving social policy directives and new constitutional principles. To summarize, direct effect is a crucial mechanism that ensures the practical relevance of EU law in the everyday lives of EU citizens and businesses. It allows individuals to invoke treaty provisions and regulations directly, and in some circumstances enables them to rely on non-implemented directives against the state. When direct effect is unavailable, especially in horizontal disputes, indirect effect and state liability step in to maintain the integrity and uniformity of the EU legal order. Thank you for listening to this lecture on the principle of direct effect within the European Union. Please subscribe and turn on notifications for future videos. Do you have any questions or suggestions on subjects for future videos? Please comment below the video. Thank you once again and have a great day. Goodbye!